Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. On this episode, I spoke with the lovely Kate O'Neill. She is a tech humanist, and I'll tell you more about Kate in a second, but I wanted to talk about last week's guest, Dan Hodges. And he and I, as I was walking out of his house, I said to him, oh my gosh, I can't believe I forgot to ask you, how did you deal with all the crime scenes and things that you came upon? And very calmly he said, I just did. And so he's a very zen guy. I was so laid back, as I mentioned last week. I told him that I was going to be going out to the body farm out in Knoxville and talking to them for the show. The body farm is, for example, if you leave your body, after you pass away, you leave your body to the body farm, and they're forensic scientists there. They put you out into the elements. It rains on you. They put things on you, dirt, whatever, and it's how they learn how the body decomposes, what happens to the body in various elements, heat, dry, rain, yada yada. And so anyway, I said to Dan, I'm a little unsure how I'm going to stomach that, being that it's going to be around cadavers, basically. And he said to put Vicks Vapor Rub under the nose, and that will help. Apparently that's how he dealt with many a crime scene. So good advice from Dan. Anyway, Kate O'Neill is awesome. She is the founder and CEO of KO Insights, which can be found at koinsights.com. She's an author. She wrote a book called Pixels and Place. And she does many things. She's a consultant, as I said, an author, a speaker, a strategist. She came to Nashville to promote Pixels in Place and did a reading and a lecture at Parnassus Books here in town. It was so fascinating. And I asked her to be on the show, and she graciously said yes. She's working on her second book now, which will be out sometime, I think, next year. And it was a really cool conversation. We talked about how humans interact with the digital world, what it all means for security and safety, how our phones gather information about us, and how valuable that is to the marketplace. Just all that kind of stuff. It's a really interesting conversation. As usual, please spread the word about Hey Human. You know where to find me, obviously, because you're listening to me now, and therefore you have found me. But please tell your friends and family and such. And if you get a chance, as I always say, go to iTunes and rate and review Hey Human. I really appreciate that. We've got over 11,000 listeners now, so you guys are spreading the word, and it's getting out there, and I'm really appreciative. I'm on heyhumanpodcast.com, always with the links for every episode. All the information that we talk about, I stick stuff up on the heyhumanpodcast.com. Kate's episode is really fascinating, and I have a lot of links to stick up there, so definitely check that out. Instagram and Facebook is Hey Human Podcast, super simple. And email me, susan@heyhumanpodcast.com. I've got fantastic episodes coming up, and there's great episodes prior. So if you get a chance, if you haven't yet, go back and check out the old stuff, because it's not old, it's all relevant. Yeah, that's all I got. That's my self-promotion plugging. Thanks for listening. As always, here we go. Hi, Kate O'Neill.
Hi there, Susan Ruth.
Thanks for being on Hey Human Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You're coming all the way from New York.
That's right. And despite some technical difficulties getting connected, here we are.
And you're representing with your I Love New York t-shirt.
Yeah, actually, it's an I Tweet New York t-shirt.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, a little Twitter bird instead of a heart.
That is,
I love it.
So funny. That's perfect for you. So I'm going to write down some accolades before and just who you are, so that even just in case the people, I always do a preamble on the show where I describe who I'm talking to and some of their accomplishments or whatever. But sometimes, people skip over that stuff. But now that we're here and they're listening, they have to hear it. So, all right. So you are the founder and CEO of KO Insights. And that's koinsights.com for those of you following along at home. And you're the previous CEO and founder of MetaMarketer.
Correct.
That is correct. Okay, and that's an analytics and strategy agency. You were the first content manager at Netflix. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome, actually. So it was, I was one of the first 100 employees there, and it was at a time where, how many people remember this or even know this, but when Netflix first got started, they were renting DVDs, a la carte, just as if you were going to Blockbuster. So, you had a due date and a time you had to get it back, and there were late fees and stuff like that. So, you'd rent the DVD, it would cost like $7 or whatever, and then you'd have to send it back. And then they figured out this subscription model where you paid a set amount, and you got the number of DVDs each month or whatever. And that they had just started that program when I became a customer. I was renting, the a la carte way, and then they did the subscription trial, and I was in like an alpha beta program for it. And I was like, this is genius. I have to be part of this. This is just the smartest thing. So I sort of gave them my resume and was like, figure out a role for me. I would love to just be part of anything. So they created this content manager role. And I was the first content manager at Netflix. I had a team of 6 content producers. We managed the whole database that contained all the descriptions and metadata and everything about all the movies. And I did things like co-managed a project that introduced all these dynamic elements to the site, things that are standard in e-commerce now, but that really weren't as common then, being able to offer up personalized content to people on every page based on your ratings and preferences and things like that. So we would know, if you were looking at a buddy cop movie, we could show you more buddy cop movies you might like or something like that. So just some really, really cool stuff that we had the chance to do in those days. So
that's
it's a fun gig.
To think that what you created is now the modus operandi for basically every streaming service on the planet.
Well, yeah, and then it's been interesting too because with Netflix's move to streaming and everybody else's move to streaming instead of DVDs. One thing that's always been fascinating to me is that Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, was investing really heavily into R&D for streaming, which at the time we were talking about as set-top boxes. Like in 99, 2000, 2001, that time frame, whenever anybody thought about what was next in video, it was set-top boxes. So you thought about you got your cable through a cable box that sat on top of your TV, and so the thought was whatever was going to come next was going to be some distributed form of set-top boxes. And it kind of was, because Roku in that generation of device was like the predecessor. Yeah, exactly. Apple TV, that sort of thing. Yeah. So really Netflix's, rather Reed's vision of being able to see that far into the future and really understand that they had to really get streaming at a functional level to be able to do set-top boxes, which really enabled them to be able to do streaming in the sense that we know it now, which is just like the loose streaming service through your computer. So it's a fascinating thing to me that he would have to have had that kind of vision, because Roku didn't even come out as a device until 2007, and really the streaming sort of followed from there, 2007, 2008. So to think that in 99, 2000, he was investing, research and development dollars into figuring out streaming at a time when they were still actively engaged in trying to win against Blockbuster, who wasn't out of the picture.
And they put Blockbuster under, really.
Yeah. So I just love that example of what it takes to really be a strategic leader, to have that level of foresight and vision. So
what you're saying is he's an alien.
Or something. He's got the tips, man. He's in on the goods.
It's pretty. And now, of course, Netflix is a production company as well. They put out their own movies and television programming, and it's exceptional. It's not just fly by night. It's exceptional.
That's right. Yeah, and I feel like actually most of the streaming services that are doing original content are doing a bang-up job at it. I mean, everybody's content, Amazon's, Hulu's, like all the original programming, by and large, has been really top quality stuff. So it is really interesting to be in this kind of renaissance of what produced video content is about.
Yeah, it's astounding. And eventually, I guess we're going to have to get to the point where they'll hologram in our living room or something, then we'll watch it as if the actors were standing in front of us or something.
Oh my gosh, what a crazy imagination you had. No, it's totally true though. I mean, you imagine like what could possibly come next, you know, the whole advent of like virtual reality and augmented reality and the ways that that's going to play out in terms of entertainment and how that's going to become mainstream is going to be fascinating to watch.
People will never leave their house. So you developed Toshiba's first intranet. That is insane.
Well, that was kind of a funny coincidence of timing almost, where it was like, I was a language major, and I was a German major and a Russian and linguistics double minor in my undergrad work, and I had a concentration in international studies. So all of this made complete sense when I first came across the web and was like, I really want to develop a website. I happened to be managing the language laboratory at the University of Illinois Chicago at the time, which was my alma mater, and I had gone to work for the language lab at some point during my schooling, and then eventually took over managing it. And so I built a website for the lab. And it was during a time like in '94 when you could keep track of every website that was coming online every day. Like that's how few there were. And so people were creating these like manually curated lists of like, here's all the new websites today. And so it made it onto one of those lists. It got me talking with a guy at Toshiba. And then, just one thing led to another. And they brought me out to interview for a role there. And I ended up building their intranet, the first intranet there. It sat on my desk. On a server on a desk, and a Spark Station 2, and I had had to install all the servers and everything myself. I didn't know what I was doing, but nobody else did either. And so that was kind of the fun. The fun of it was like figuring out how does this work and reading up on it. And this is like kind of in the days before you could Google anything. The equivalent. It was a crazy time. Yeah. But it was really fun.
You had to get your Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, and it's funny, like, it's just, I think now it's been a really great point of reference for me whenever I talk to young people in like high school or college, trying to figure out what their future looks like, is like, you don't know. You have no idea because things are going to exist by the time you get out of school that don't exist today, like they did for me. And I could never have anticipated that my career would take this technology turn, and that 20 years later I would be describing myself as a tech humanist and writing books about how technology fits into the human experience. And none of that made any sense to me at the time, in 1990 whatever year it was.
having a proclivity for language, to me it makes perfect sense that you'd be drawn to the language of a computer.
Well, there is some sense to that. Like, I think one way that it stays relevant in my work and in my life is that I look at things through the lens of meaning, and meaning is a really important recurring concept in the work I do, and it also plays out in how I think about the web or digital experience as a whole, because there's the way that in language, when you think about like semantics versus syntax, there's like the structure, which is syntax, and then there's the meaning layer of a sort, which is the semantics. And if you think about those as sort of two almost separable layers, it's a little bit similar to how I think we experience things like the web or digital experience as a whole. Like, there's the kind of underpinnings and the code and the linkages and things like that all form the architecture of a sort, that on top of which we create this layered content, and that's the meaning and the fundamental understanding of like what it is we're trying to say to one another. But those things totally rely on one another. You can't have one without the other. I do think that relates. Sorry, go ahead.
I know, I was just saying, it's a visual aesthetic too. I mean, I think that that people building their websites, for an example, is they're trying to they're trying to not only get the information in place, but really they have to draw people in visually, especially nowadays where the attention span is null.
Yeah, that's true. And so certainly, there's this kind of nonverbal language piece that comes into play as well. So for me, the language metaphor stays very relevant in how I think about digital experience and technology, and how people use technology to communicate with one another is kind of the recurring theme throughout my career, is using that mode or sort of coming back to that question again and again in different ways, trying to solve different problems.
Well, really quick on it, I'm going to write this down because I don't want to forget to ask you this, but explain to folks who may not know what an intranet is. I know that some people won't know.
Sure. So it's usually within a company. It could be an organization, it could be kind of a more loosely connected set of people, but typically in a company, as certainly a company as big as Toshiba, or I also worked on the intranet at HCA, so Hospital Corporation of America, which is an enormous company. Any of those big companies have a need to share documents and have a repository of knowledge, and be able to communicate with one another, with other employees inside the company in ways that the web kind of facilitates, but they certainly don't want to be doing it out on public websites, and that wouldn't make any sense for customers or patients or whoever to run across that stuff. So it has to be secure, it has to be locked down, but it also it follows a lot of the same sort of user or usability requirements that a website does, or a typical website does. So you have to think about who's going to be using it, and how do you make sure that they can get to what they need quickly and things like that. So it's always a lot of those kinds of challenges with it, especially for a group like HCA with so many different kinds of job roles represented within that company. And so thinking about how people would be able to get to the information they need quickly and not have it be confusing to try to get to was always a very interesting challenge.
Is that what the initial idea of Facebook was, an intranet for colleges, right? I mean, it was a bigger idea of the little idea kind of thing? Or?
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting comparison. It would actually be more like an extranet is the term that would generally be used if it's outside of the internal network of a company. But very quickly, I think that there just was no similar model for what Facebook became at the time. If you watch the movie The Social Network,
I haven't seen it yet.
If you've not seen it, it's pretty good. If you're into Aaron Sorkin,
I love Aaron Sorkin
dialogue.
Yes, big fan.
Yeah. So one thing that's interesting in that, I hadn't realized until I saw that movie, and I don't know if this is fictionalized or if it's true, that Mark Zuckerberg was using LiveJournal really extensively throughout the process of creating Facebook in the movie. And I don't know if that's actually the case or not, but I was a really big LiveJournal user. And so it's a kind of a similar idea if you use it that way, where you can just post statuses and share it out to your group of friends, and they can like and comment on it or whatever. Yeah. So the fact that it sort of came from this blogging platform, in a sense, makes some sort of sense when you think about Facebook that way.
So there was something you said a second ago about, I wrote it down because I didn't want to forget, about the way we use language through these modes now, and how we interface with the computers or our phones or whatnot. Do you think in that regard that humans are becoming more machine? I mean, and there's that idea of someday robots are going to take over, and I'm thinking we already are robots in our own way.
I don't know. That's an interesting question, and I think we certainly have adapted to technology in ways that that probably would have looked very foreign 20 to 50 or whatever more years ago. Yeah. If anybody, I think anybody who is time traveling from a few decades ago were to land in 2017 in your average restaurant and see families sitting together, all looking at their phones, it would strike them as very, very odd. And it strikes people today as odd, I think, sometimes too, except if you're one of those people, and it feels very natural that everyone has their interconnected lives that that happens through the internet, as well as their physical lives that happen in the space around them. So I don't know that I necessarily think that we're becoming more robot or, Android or whatever, although that certainly can happen in the future. I mean, I think we know that things like implants are going to probably happen. We have
You're talking
about already.
Isn't Elon Musk working?
Yeah, well, Elon Musk is working on something that's more like a neural network that would connect with our own thinking and our own brain power. So that's a really interesting hybrid idea. But I'm even meaning like, as opposed to wearing an Apple Watch, let's say, or a Fitbit, maybe instead of having to wear it as a bracelet type or watch type accessory, you could just have it implanted in your arm or in your chest or your neck or whatever, and then you have that device with you all the time if you trust it, if you think that's a good thing to do. And so things like being able to measure the amount of steps you take every day, and the things that people use those wearables for, being able to track heart rate and being able to do all the things that people do within the quantified self movement. That could certainly happen more effectively with an implant. And then the more you think about the potential for things like that, the more you think like, yeah, we probably do have this trajectory where, or at least a possible trajectory where we become a little more robot or a little more Android or whatever it is.
Yeah. I want to save that thought of what you just said for what I'm going to be asking you in a minute. But I think it's just so fascinating to think about. Well, like, for example, my father has a pacemaker, which is keeping his heart regulated. It is a machine that he wears inside his body, and as do many people have machines that, run particular parts of their body that, might not be visible to the outside world. But then you say to somebody, oh, would you ever implant an iPhone into your body so that when you go grocery shopping, all you have to do is walk through and it's cataloged everything you've purchased or, whatever. It horrifies people to a large extent. But I think, gosh, it's really not... It would not support. I don't feel like I would do it. I don't even own an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or anything like that. But that's just me. But it would not shock me that people would opt for that. I've seen the lines at the Mac store when the Apple Watch came out, or the next big thing that Steve Jobs created. Yeah,
it's not that far fetched, because I think if we're really self-conscious or self-aware about it, we realize, like, for most of us, there is not a moment of the day that we're without our phones. That's already the persistence of the device is already in place, and so then to step to wearables isn't a big jump, and to go from wearables to implants feels like a big jump because there's a level of invasiveness and kind of like. I think that starts to breach issues of trust that people have, like, what if I want to get rid of this thing, or what if I want to turn it off, or how do I know that it's not going to malfunction or perform some nefarious deed or whatever, or infect me in some way. Like, I think those concerns, if we have a sort of social discourse that starts to address those and really make those feel less anxious, then I think we will start to see that become pretty normal, because it doesn't feel like functionally it's that big of a stretch, right? Like, and you think about all the advantages it could have, but believe me, I'm not necessarily speeding our way there, because I'm just as nervous as most people about that kind of thing. I think that from my vantage point, working around technology very closely and kind of doing research and analysis and speaking and writing about technology and innovation, I certainly see the ways that tech companies go wrong, and the ways that leadership of tech companies can steer off course. So to think of entrusting that level of access to my body to a technology firm, to a device that ultimately is owned by a technology firm and all the data is accessible to that technology firm. I mean, Apple is a very trustworthy company for many people, but even they, I feel like I would have a lot of hesitation before giving my data to them.
See, to me, it's not so far-fetched at all. This is exactly how I envision it. I envision in the sense of militarily, so you have GIs, right? General issue is what GI stands for. They have to do whatever is being told to them, and that's inoculation or whatever. And there have been, through the years, things that have been declassified where military people are used as guinea pigs in some ways or another. So who's to say that a huge tech firm doesn't get a huge contract with the military? They implant something in the GIs so that not only are they traceable and trackable, so that if they do get hurt or whatever, like it could maybe tell if this soldier is down and he is in the blah blah coordinate of Afghanistan and he's losing blood rapidly or his heart rate is slowing or whatever. I could definitely see that, but I could also see a future where there's some sort of a brain implant that takes away our fear or maybe our ethics or whatever to make a super soldier. There's like all these, I know I'm sort of writing science fiction right now, but is it that far off?
Well, it's science fiction only if it's not an accepted reality today, right?
Right.
And I don't think, I do think you're right. It's not that far off, and certainly a lot of our technology innovations have come to us by way of military innovation. Yes. So it's really a plausible future. It may even be present, and we're just not privy to that level of classified information, at some level. So I try not to concern myself too much with, what I think feels like science fiction. I have this sort of love-hate relationship with the term futurist. I get asked a lot to speak to groups about trends and predictions and, kind of what's going on, what the last few years' trends have been, and then what we can see kind of leading us into the next year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever. And I try not to get too caught up in that, because I feel like what that does is lead into this kind of speculative posturing that, you try to like claim an idea or, put yourself out there that you thought of this first or whatever. What I think is much more important is to keep focused on what the human experience through all of this is going to be, and really bring all of the technology and all the innovation back around to how do we make sure that everything, kind of comes back to people having fulfillment and meaning and being able to live quality lives. And so, questions of, do we have implants that, take away our fear and our ethics? That certainly is a valid concern and something to kind of build an idea around, like, what would we do and how do we make sure that doesn't happen in a future trajectory. And so I think that, for me, like the book I'm working on right now is about automation and like artificial intelligence and other forms of that sort of technology and its impact on meaningful human experiences. And so I want to think about, what does it look like if artificial intelligence kind of gets away from us in some ways and, gets into a territory that's kind of what we would deem to be unethical if we haven't developed the sort of set of instructions right, or the guiding parameters right for how the machine functions. Those are important questions, I think, when you think about it in that sense. But again, like I try to just keep it reeled into how does this really affect us now, and how are companies going to plan their strategy for the next few years around the innovations and the technologies they're going to deploy to serve humans. That's where it comes back to the rubber meeting the road for me.
Yeah, it's funny you think about people like Gene Roddenberry who conceptualized beings like the Borg or what that are that hybrid and how it went wrong, or you could argue that maybe maybe it didn't go wrong, that maybe it's actually functioning correctly as a hive mind, which we could learn a lot from a hive mind, I suppose, in some ways.
Sure. I mean, I think that science fiction has definitely served a role, I think, for people, a lot of people who work in technology in terms of helping them imagine possible futures and possible scenarios. It's never been a real part of my my experience. Like I'm not literarily, it's not what I'm drawn to, and I don't enjoy it. I don't enjoy sci-fi movies, so it's kind of funny. I think a lot of people find that surprising, knowing what I do for a living.
I'm surprised. That shocks me.
But you know what? I think it's very plausible. Like when you come back to like why, for me, the stories that are most relatable are the ones that have some really foundational, fundamental human relationship at their core.
Sure.
So I've never been interested in like fantasy or, kind of created worlds or whatever. I'm very interested in more contemporary stories or past, kind of fictitious history stories of how people relate to one another.
Yeah.
Like that's what it all comes back to. And it makes complete sense, I think, in context of the work I do, that everything for me as a tech humanist, everything is about how people relate to one another through technology.
Well, see, that's a great segue into your book, Pixels in Place. Okay, so the full title, Pixels in Place, Connecting Human Experience Across Physical and Digital Spaces. There in some of the stuff you sent me to read, there was a particular sentence that stood out to me of yours, a quote of yours. The shape meaning takes in marketing is empathy. So first let's talk about the book and what that means and what it's all about, and then let's talk about that sentence you had.
Yeah, okay. So Pixels in Place came to be because I was hired by a group to do a keynote on the meaning of place. So I've already said, meaning is this kind of recurring theme through a lot of my work, and this organization, which is an organization, a national trade organization of like college admissions counselors. Mm-hmm. That's the function they all serve. They had noticed my work around meaning, and they wanted to, at their national convention, they wanted to have somebody talk about the meaning of place in essence, like how do you distill for someone who's visiting a college campus, a student visiting a college campus, and that student's parents, let's say, in a 15-minute tour, how do you get across to them what the next 4 to 5 years of their lives are going to be like? How do you essentialize the place? How do you get across like all of the things that they're going to experience and what's significant about it and what differentiates it, one from another? So that was a really, really interesting and fun assignment. I really dug it, but I also found during my research a ton of opportunity to explore that concept in a more convergence-oriented way, like talking about how we think about digital experience and digital places in sort of physical ways, how we've kind of infused digital place with these metaphors and understandings of physical place. And so one of the things that I do through the book is talk about the metaphors of place that are visible, sort of recognizable in digital experience. Things like we talk about we use the word sight, which is certainly a usable in a physical context, but it's obviously a core idea in physical. We talk about a lot of the metaphors of buildings, like windows, for example, describe this common metaphor in digital experience, but they're obviously borrowing from our physical world. So There's a lot of that. There's so much of it, and it's really interesting to me. But then to take it further, then what I did is think about how to unpack that in different industries and how different executives and strategists and experienced designers could think about a very intentional use of the overlap of physical and digital space in creating their experiences for customers and users and students and patients and so on. Like all the roles that humans play in every interaction with a brand or a company, to really think about how to dimensionalize that for people and give this kind of full sense of physical space and digital space, because people do experience them in a combined way. We very rarely go into physical space of any sort, like a store or a museum or whatever, without having a digital component to that experience. And we very rarely experience the digital world, and we don't experience the digital world without there being a physical context, because we're always somewhere. Right. And we, the reality is it's either a constraint, like our phones, like we're seeing digital content through a constrained web browser or app or whatever, so it really sort of shifts the context of how we can consume content, or it enables us in some way. Like we could use augmented reality or a Google Maps kind of navigation to navigate our physical world. So this interesting way in which digital and physical experiences complement one another as well as constrain one another, it seemed like it was a very relevant and timely discussion to have. Mm-hmm. So in the quote that you mentioned, is part of kind of an exploration of how meaning belongs in this discussion. And so I feel like one of the things that happens is meaning. When I talk about meaning, it sounds really fluffy to people. At first it sounds like, oh, that's a really vague, abstract concept, until I think you anchor it in how it comes to life in different fields. And so in marketing, in that example I was saying, it comes to life as empathy. So if you really think about within the discipline of marketing, if you're trying to be meaningful in marketing, you're really trying to think about what the people that you're marketing to are interested in, and how you can create natural affinity for what you're offering and those people. So there's an alignment between what their intentions are, what the people you're serving and trying to market to, what their intentions are and what their needs and desires are in the world, and what you offer. So trying to bring those as much in alignment as possible.
So some very places like Nike, or that they really nail it. They understand their customer. But you had mentioned something both in the article I had read and also earlier in this conversation about sometimes they get it really wrong. And in the article I read, you used the word creepy, which cracked me up, because I can't even tell you how many times I've been sitting with friends and we've discussed how it's so creepy that we'll just be talking about a product or a service or whatever, and our phones happen to be on the table. And of course, it's gathering information unbeknownst to us. I mean, if you're in the know, but if you don't know that, it's still happening. And then the next day you see all these advertisements on your phone or on your Facebook or whatever you spoke about. And that's creepy.
It is creepy. And I think it's creepy. It's creepy now because we're not used to it. I think it will still feel a little creepy as we do get used to it. I think that where we are is at this kind of, and we'll always be at a kind of pivot point of what's acceptable and what is pushing the edges, right? Yeah. But I think, one of my favorite examples, and it's so easy to hate on Uber anymore, but I love the example of, Uber was outed in a sense a couple of years ago as that part of what the data that they collect when they get your ride information, your ride request information, is your phone's battery level. And so they actually admitted, a spokesperson for the company admitted that when they collect that information, they have actually tested to see if they show you a higher price, if you have a lower battery level, that you're likely to accept it because you know that you have a low battery level, and you're kind of desperate at that point. You're like, my phone might run out of battery before the ride gets here. I better just take it. I don't have too many options right now. And so they swear up and down, or at least they did in this article, a year and a half ago or whatever it was, that they haven't used it, in any kind of mainstream way, or haven't really deployed it in production or anything like that. But the fact is, they're collecting that data. And there's really no good example that most people can come up with of why they could use that data in a way that actually serves the user or serves anyone besides Uber, right? So there's another example. It just happened yesterday, although I don't know when this episode will go live. But just recently, a couple was having an argument, and it was looking like, in the retelling and the reporting I've seen, it looks like an abusive situation. And the man said, did you call the sheriffs to the woman that he was yelling at? And there was a Google Home device, and it heard the phrase "call the sheriffs" and took that as a command. And so it called 911. Oh my God. And the police showed up, and there was an altercation, and they arrested the man who was, we think, presumably abusing his partner. Well, okay, so there's a couple of levels to that story, right? One is, well, thank goodness that the police were called. But another thing is, there's been a lot of cases of police showing up at doors and just starting shooting, and there being a lot of sort of people who had called the police and then getting shot by the police when they show up. Horrible situations. A lot of police shooting overreach has been happening, as we all know, in the last few years. And so there's a big social justice question here, and a privacy question, and a safety question, which is, when these things are listening to us all the time, and there's a certain level of, okay, that one was an accident in a sense, where the device misinterpreted a command. But if it's either there's an accident, or there's some kind of over-eager programming where someone maybe thinks that that's a good feature to include in the options of the device that you don't know how to turn on or off or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of ways that this can go wrong.
Yeah.
And so I think it's incumbent upon us, as strategists, as designers, as people who are thinking about technology and its role in human experiences, to really think about the implications of the decisions of those designs, and the potential for overreach, and the potential for safety violations, and ways that it could just be bad.
Yeah, it is an interesting ethical question, because I've talked with friends also about the fact that we know they're listening in on our phones and our conversations, and they justify it as, well, we're making sure that there's no terrorism talk, or there's they're looking for key words in the conversations. And I always say, well, if that's what it takes to keep us safe, I guess it's fine. I'm not talking about anything that they might hear some very interesting conversations, but I have nothing to hide at the same time. But then ethically, do they have any business doing that? Well, not really. I mean, it's like this whole weird thing that they sell safety or fear or whatnot. And you talked to so I saw you lecture here in Nashville, and you talked about the fact that that there's cameras on the street corners watching our every move. Our phones are registering what we purchase, what we're reading, what we're saying. All this kind of it's that big brother versus the little guy, but then the little guy's like, well, I'm scared, so maybe it's okay. It's just it's such a huge topic.
It is a huge topic, and the I have nothing to hide framework is a really problematic one, because we have to be mindful of the fact that different people have different experiences, and we do really have marginalized people in our society that we have class issues and race issues and lots of really kind of historic baggage that we still haven't done a very good job sorting through in our current culture. So I think to try to have conversations about privacy and security without considering that there are people for whom this would be a grave danger, for things to kind of overreach their security, for them to overreach their ability to their right to not have the police called on them, for example.
Absolutely.
I think that's a consideration that needs to be part of the discussion. And it's also a reason why, and I just said this on Twitter yesterday, it's one of the reasons why diversity in technology is so fundamentally important. Why having a very truly diverse, across all different dimensions of diversity, workforce doing technology programming and design and strategy and all of this. Why it becomes very important that we have a lot of gender diversity, racial diversity, sexual orientation diversity, and disability diversity, all kinds of ways that people's experiences differ, so that what it really comes down to is biases get encoded into data structures and into technology all the time. It's just human nature. We program and design things with assumptions built in, and the more those assumptions are based on our lived experience. And so the more diverse our lived experience is, the more likely we are to program with less bias and to make things that have less chance of going terribly wrong for people. So I think that's a really kind of important way that these topics kind of connect with one another, is that, we really need to be thinking about hiring in ways that, are inclusive and getting, and not just in technology, but certainly it's important in technology to get those lived experiences representing the best possible perspective on what reality really is for a wide variety of people.
Well, I mean, that's such an important point too. When I say things like, "Oh, I have nothing to hide," I'm talking about me, myself. But I am a humanist. I'm certainly a libertarian, and I don't think anyone has the right to listen in on someone if they say, "Oh yeah, I sold weed to my grandma," and then suddenly
right, and that sort of thing. I think it's still very much in debate about whether that sort of thing is going to be admissible in criminal cases. For example, like I know there have been examples of Amazon Echo devices that have been able to pick up and record snippets of interactions that took place in what become later crime scenes. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, do those passive recordings belong being admissible as evidence in any way? Like if there was a man who had been killed or who was found dead in his apartment, and there was an Amazon Alexa device or an Echo device that was present in the home, and the recordings were, I believe they were subpoenaed by the sheriff's office or department or something like that. Amazon sort of has to admit at this point that they do have this database of passive recordings. And now it becomes a much more interesting question of, should the passive recordings going on in these smart home devices be able to be admitted under any circumstances, even when they might help solve a crime like a murder type of situation. Right. So it's really a big puzzle, because of course you don't want to create precedent for something that could go in a nefarious way.
Oh, absolutely. And didn't Apple refuse the subpoena? Weren't they being subpoenaed for information on the phone? I don't remember.
Yeah, on the San Bernardino shooting, there was a subpoena to provide decryption on the shooter's device. They've refused, and rightly so.
I agree. And the thing is you can follow. I think the people that get caught up in the moment, they're like, well, absolutely, Apple should release this stuff, and it's so important, and this act of domestic terrorism and violence, and what does it mean for the bigger picture? And I'm like, yes, exactly. What does it mean for the bigger? Follow the line. Keep going down the line. Flash forward 50 years, 25 years, and that moment in time will change everything. So I applauded Apple for saying, no, you can't, this is private information, you can't have this. I'm sure I'll get letters for that, but I do think that's, important.
Well, you got to take a stand on it. I mean, I think, people may have differing opinions and ways of parsing it together and understanding the risk and reward of that situation. But in my view, and it sounds like in your view too, you do have to be thinking about ways that creates precedent for something that could be abused in the future. And that, even if we could all come to an agreement that in this particular case it's good, then that situation would become precedent for situations in the future that may not be as clear cut. Even if this is clear cut, and I don't necessarily think everybody would agree that it's clear cut. So it's a really puzzling thing, and thank goodness, my expertise is not in law and trying to figure out how to determine what's admissible and what isn't, and what good precedent for these kinds of things is or is not. But my expertise is in experience and in trying to think about how to create the most meaningful experiences for people in the moment, by thinking about the future of strategy and how things are going to come to life in different ways as time goes on, as the natural trajectory of innovation around these devices and future devices comes into being, and really paying attention to the patterns that are in place. So it matters to think about things like, the home invasion or the domestic dispute situation where the police show up. It matters to think about smart devices listening in on us all the time, and your example of your phones listening, and then you seeing tailored, targeted ads in your Facebook stream the next day. Like, wait a minute, I was just talking about these socks yesterday, and now they're showing up in my Facebook stream or whatever. Socks would be a terrible example of that. Something much more exciting.
Though. I don't know. That's a good example. I was down with the socks. That was good.
It just seems, it's a simple enough example. I feel like people have been able to provide many to me over the last few months and years of things that they have said that have been completely absurd, unusual, edge case discussions that they would never have had before and never would have been searching for, and just circumstances brought them up in a discussion, and then the very next day, they're seeing targeted ads for that thing.
There was a question I asked you when you gave the lecture that I'd like to ask again, even though you gave an answer, and it was a great answer, but I'm going to ask it again just so other people hear.
Sure.
I asked you how your research and these things that you've learned along the way and where you're heading in your research, how that has changed how you operate within the context of your own life.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question because I see so many different approaches. People that are peers of mine take different approaches to how they present themselves online, and what they share and what they don't share. I am definitely someone who I think could be perceived as an oversharer in what I post. I do post a lot of, pretty personal things, and I've been very visible about, life events that have gone on, and things like that. But I also am very mindful of them. And so it's a decision I think everybody has to make for themselves and sort of interpret in whatever way is going to be meaningful for how they connect with others and what risk they're exposing themselves to. But I think they do need to think about that risk. Yeah. They do need to think about, what every little thing that they share online has the potential to go completely out of their control and be seen by anyone and be used in any way. And so, we do have to be mindful of that. But that said, I think the example I gave you in Nashville was, I get this, Facebook does the on this day, kind of like trace back through your memories thing. And I love using that as an example to not only review, kind of what the last 10 years or whatever it's been of being on that platform have been. That's really, I think, a really fascinating sort of slice through history, when we don't, a way of presenting our personal histories that we don't usually see, this arbitrary, like on this day kind of arrangement. But it's also, I use it as an opportunity to go back and kind of like retrofit the permissions of content and decide, like things that I shared publicly, 5 years ago or something like that, maybe it's not really relevant to have those be public anymore. Maybe, I don't necessarily want them being, certainly they're indexed and searchable in ways that, they're probably in publicly searchable archives in some way, shape, or form. But maybe I don't necessarily want for someone coming new to my Facebook profile and digging through my archives to come across them. Like maybe that's just something that like I'm going to hold back right now. And I think that's something that I sort of offer that up every time I talk to groups as like a tip you can take away for yourself, is just use them as your own tool and, kind of re-own your own privacy and re-own your permissions. So I've done that with a few other platforms as well, like Foursquare. I was really an avid user of Foursquare for many years, and even when they split off and were doing Swarm, and everybody had fallen off as nobody was really using it anymore, except for a few really diehard users. And a couple of my friends and I had these like ongoing competitions where we were always checking in for the most points and trying to game it and everything. But I really got nervous about, or not nervous exactly, but just like concerned at a certain degree about the level of data and patterning, pattern matching that I was giving to the public and to the government and to whoever, just kind of what I was putting out there about my movements through place. Sure. And, kind of what I was saying about, here's where I tend to go. So if you really wanted to find me, here's where you would find me. So, there could be any number of situations where I don't necessarily want that out there. A stalker could be the situation, or it could be, the government gets overzealous and, tries to crack down on people who have been at protests, and I've been at protests, so I don't necessarily want that to be out there. And maybe it doesn't ever get to the Handmaid's Tale level dystopia or something like that. But I think we just have to be able to come to a place where we each feel comfortable with the level of exposure we're putting ourselves through and the level of connectedness we get from that. So there's a balance to strike between the more I share personally and intimately and truthfully about who I am and what I'm doing every day, the more my friends can keep up with me and, connect with me and relate to me. But at the same time, the more I'm kind of giving out into the algorithms of the world to figure out who I am and what to market to me and how to trace me and track me and things like that.
Yeah, it's a fascinating world. It's such a fascinating topic to me. All this AI, I think about this stuff all the time. I'm so intrigued by it all.
Then you should be a consultant, strategist, author, speaker as well.
Well, I think you probably know a heap more than I do. For me, it's just going off on strange tangents in my mind about possibilities and what it all means. What is the new book about?
So the new book is about artificial intelligence and automation and other forms of, sort of machine-driven interaction and how that relates to meaningful human experience and how it shapes it. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, how data-driven experiences shape human experiences. And so I'm really excited about this topic because I think it's very timely. I think it's also it's super important just for this reason we're just talking about. This we all have to be able to navigate our lives in the world where data is everywhere around us, where everything we do is giving off data. It's just kind of like I talk about this in Pixels in Place, that there's a data trail of everything we do and every product we consume and every place we go and everything. There's data associated with all of it. And that's not bad or nefarious. It's just, something that I think we need to be very conscious and mindful of, like how we sort of create our movements through that space and how we live in that world. And then on the flip side of that, from a business executive and, business owner, designer, strategist point of view, how do you create experiences that connect with people in these data-rich environments that are profitable, but that also create meaningful opportunities, that can make your brand more resonant and memorable and meaningful to consumers, while also being respectful of privacy and discreet and things like that. So there's a way to do it, and I'm very excited about kind of exploring that and laying that out there for people.
Do you know the title of the book yet?
I'm working on. I have a working title, but I'm not going to put it out there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And when do you foresee it coming out? The book.
I had been working to a fall launch this year, just like I did a fall launch with Pixels in Place last year. But I think I've actually decided to push it to spring of 2018. So that's what I'll target. And it's been really interesting too, as the journey of an independent book publisher. You call it self-published author, but it's actually I think it's a little bit of a misleading thing to say that, because you really, as a self-published author, you become an independent book publisher, and trying to figure out all of the many functions and activities of a publisher, and getting the author on the road and making sure that there are opportunities to promote the book in relevant contexts and connect with audiences and, kind of support the content in various ways. It's a very interesting thing to kind of straddle that reality of being an author and also the publisher of that author.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a lot to take on. Hence your flowcharts behind you. Talk about those. Yeah. When we first got online, I saw those behind you. I'm like, what is all that? So to tell the people that can't see, behind Kate is all these pieces of paper that have much line. They kind of look like the Final Four bracketing kind of thing.
Yeah.
So what is that?
It's funny. I had one podcast interview I was doing where the guy described it as the John Nash Beautiful Mind background.
Yeah, I can see that too. Yeah.
It's mind maps. So if anybody's not familiar, there's a sort of diagramming technique where you take a core idea and put it at the center of a piece of paper. You can do this on, by hand with a pen and paper. But I do it in a software app called MindNode. There's many other apps that do it. You take just a core concept and then you sort of break it out into related concepts and distill those into their related concepts and so on. And you can create connections between them and, kind of really dig into it's sort of like outlining in a sense. Mm-hmm. but that I do this in a way that lets me take a concept like meaning and blow that out in a bunch of different ways, and then take a concept like strategy and blow that out in a bunch of different ways. And then when I usually find that there's a node of the network, in a sense, like a one little leg of the whole diagram in the meaning diagram, and one little leg of the strategy diagram that speak to each other, in a sense. And it's a really cool and interesting connection that I probably wouldn't have arrived at in any other way. And it's an opportunity for an article or a blog post or some way, or a talk or something like that. So it's a really cool way, of getting yourself through some really disconnected and interesting thinking.
Wow, what a great idea. Mind Node, it's called?
Yeah, Mind Node. I think it's 2 words. But yeah, you can search for that and come across it. I think there's a free version and a paid version, and I don't know what the difference is, but there's also other free apps out there. Or just draw it on a piece of paper. Sure. It's a great way to get some clarity in your thinking.
Yeah. Kate, I feel like I could probably ask you 8,000 million questions. This is so great. I really appreciate your time, because I know you're very busy. Tell everybody I'm going to put links on heyhumanpodcast.com that'll link to all this that we've talked about, your books and all your socials and all that stuff. But for people listening, what is the best way to find you?
koinsights.com is my business website. I'm also incredibly prolific on Twitter, if anybody is game for that. So I'm at Kate O, Kateo on Twitter. And there's a million other ways to connect with me online, but those will get you there.
Yeah, and again, I'll put links for that. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Susan. This has been really fun.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bye, everyone.